Hello, I'm Janet McCabe, Acting Assistant Administrator for EPA's Office of Air and Radiation. It's an exciting time at EPA, and I'm delighted that so many of you want to know more about the agency's proposed Clean Power Plan. The plan continues to receive plenty of attention, and we've heard a number of questions about the proposed rule and what it means to states, utilities, and American families. In short, the Clean Power Plan is about getting all the power we need with less of what we don't need: pollution. Power plants are the largest concentrated source of carbon dioxide emissions in the United States, together accounting for roughly 1/3 of all domestic greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change, fueled by carbon pollution, increases risks to our health, our communities, our economy, and our way of life. The Clean Power Plan will not only cut hundreds of millions of tons of carbon pollution, but also significantly reduce harmful smog and soot. Together, these reductions will provide important health protections to our most vulnerable citizens, including our children and the elderly. The benefits are substantial, with health and climate benefits far outweighing the costs of the plan. The Clean Power Plan is truly a collaborative effort built on advice from states, cities, businesses, utilities, and citizens. The result is a flexible, common-sense plan reflecting that different states have different mixes of sources and different opportunities to cut carbon pollution. And this is where the Clean Air Act state-federal partnership is really important. EPA sets the emission reduction goal, and states identify a path forward using whatever current or new electricity production and pollution control policies they have chosen that meet their needs. This process follows the law, recognizes the progress states, cities, and businesses have already made, and builds on their ongoing efforts, and is respectful of states' authority and ability to make the best choices for their citizens and their economies. Now that we've issued the proposal, it doesn't end there. We want to hear from you. We will hold 4 public hearings in Atlanta, Denver, Pittsburgh, and Washington, D.C. during the week of July 28th. You can also comment on the proposal in writing, either online or through standard mail or fax. The comment period is open through October 16th. More information is available on our website at epa.gov/cleanpowerplan. As Administrator Gina McCarthy mentioned in her speech on June 2nd, we have a moral obligation to ensure the world we leave behind is as safe, healthy, and vibrant as the one we inherited. The proposed Clean Power Plan is a huge step toward delivering on that promise. Thank you.
Welcome to this online presentation of EPA's proposed Clean Power Plan to reduce carbon pollution from existing power plants. This overview presentation is designed to explain why the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is working to reduce carbon pollution, to identify the Clean Air Act authorities EPA is using to address carbon pollution from existing power plants, and to provide highlights of the Clean Power Plan proposal. This proposed rule is an important part of the President's Climate Action Plan. President Obama directed EPA to set flexible carbon pollution standards, regulations, or guidelines as appropriate for power plants using Section 111 of the Clean Air Act. Last fall, EPA took the first step by proposing carbon dioxide emission standards for new fossil fuel-fired power plants. EPA proposed these standards under Section 111B of the Clean Air Act. On June 2, 2014, EPA signed a proposal outlining how states can develop plans to reduce carbon pollution from existing power plants. EPA proposed the Clean Power Plan using Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. Climate change is not just a problem for the future. We are facing its impacts today. Average temperatures have risen in most states since 1901, with 7 of the top 10 warmest years on record occurring since 1998. Weather and climate disasters in 2012 cost the American economy more than $100 billion. Carbon pollution, if unchecked, will lead to long-lasting changes in our climate. These changes threaten public health and the environment for current and future generations. Some public health risks include more heat-related illnesses and deaths resulting from more frequent and intense heat waves and drought. Worsening smog, also called ground-level ozone pollution, which may lead to more asthma attacks and other respiratory diseases. Increasing intensity of extreme events like hurricanes, extreme precipitation, and flooding, which can lead to water quality issues and damage our health services infrastructure. And increasing the geographic range of insects, which can spread disease such as Lyme disease and West Nile virus. The most vulnerable include children, older adults, people with heart or lung disease, and people living in poverty. They are at most risk from the health impacts of climate change. As we understand the consequences of uncontrolled carbon pollution, we understand that we must act. Of the 4 key greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, or CO2, is emitted primarily from the burning of fossil fuels, including oil, natural gas, and coal. In 2012, carbon dioxide accounted for 82% of the total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. The Clean Power Plan addresses the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States: emissions from generating and using electricity. Almost 1/3 of all greenhouse gas pollution in the U.S. comes from the generation of electricity by power plants. This proposal looks at the system from the power plant to the plug. It gives states the flexibility to develop plans that will address carbon pollution from existing power plants, as well as take action to address the range of potential reductions available in the electricity sector. This proposal is just one aspect of the President's Climate Action Plan. The President's plan pulls together agencies across the federal government to work together with other key partners, states, cities, industries, consumers, and the international community to address the challenge of climate change. EPA is working on a number of fronts to address climate change. In addition to reducing emissions from power plants, EPA's contribution to the President's plan also encompasses work on building a 21st century transportation sector, cutting energy waste in homes, businesses, and factories, as well as reducing methane from landfills and other sources. EPA is also working on adaptation measures to help prepare the United States for the impact of climate change, and leading efforts to encourage those in the international community to do their part to address climate change. To develop the Clean Power Plan, EPA spent 9 months engaging with states, utilities, labor unions, non-governmental organizations, consumer groups, industry, and the public across the United States. We heard from stakeholders who said that a reliable, affordable energy supply is vital. Flexibility is key. Power plants are part of a large and complex interstate system. States need time to put their plans together, and EPA should find a way to allow for and encourage regional solutions. During the engagement process, EPA learned that states are leading the way in reducing carbon pollution, especially through programs that encourage energy efficiency. EPA heard about many of the state's programs, including those that are working well. To date, 38 states have renewable portfolio standards or goals. 47 states have demand-side energy efficiency programs. 10 states have market-based greenhouse gas emission programs. And 27 states have energy efficiency standards or goals. These state actions provided the foundation for our analysis, and EPA is building on these actions in the Clean Power Plan. The proposed Clean Power Plan recognizes that the way power is generated in this country is diverse, complex, and interconnected. The Clean Air Act gives EPA a tool to address carbon pollution from power plants in a way that will achieve meaningful reductions. Section 111D of the Clean Air Act is flexible. It directs EPA to identify the best system for reducing emissions that accounts for costs, size of the reductions, technology, and feasibility. It also allows for state-by-state information to be considered and does not require a one-size-fits-all approach. EPA can also look at opportunities that will yield other health and environmental benefits, also known as co-benefits, while addressing carbon pollution. Previous EPA rules under this section of the Clean Air Act have considered add-on control technologies, like scrubbers, that are technically feasible to deploy at virtually any facility. In applying Section 111D to existing power plants, EPA found a wide variety of ways to reduce carbon pollution that are commercially available, technically feasible, and cost-effective. And these are not just limited to add-on controls. The Clean Power Plan recognizes that the opportunity for reducing carbon pollution vary from state to state, depending on how electricity is generated, the energy infrastructure, and other factors. EPA analyzed the practical and affordable strategies that states and utilities are already using to lower carbon pollution from the power sector. These include improving demand-side energy efficiency, improving power plant operations, and encouraging reliance on low-carbon energy. Now that we have covered what informed and directed EPA's approach, let's look at the specifics of the Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan has two main parts: state-specific goals to lower carbon pollution from power plants and guidelines to help states develop plans for meeting their goals. EPA set a goal for each state, and each must meet or reach its goal by 2030, while starting to make meaningful progress toward reductions by 2020. Each state's goal is a rate, a single number for the future carbon intensity of that state. The state goals recognize the tremendous opportunity for reductions through energy efficiency improvements, which is one of the key strategies states and utilities have used to reduce carbon pollution. For clarity, EPA is not setting goals based on percentage reductions against a baseline year. Rather, when states meet their goals in 2030, EPA projects that the increased efficiency and reduced carbon intensity will result in 30% less carbon pollution from the power sector when compared to 2005 levels. States must develop plans to meet their goals, but EPA is not prescribing a specific approach or set of measures that states have to include in their plans. The Clean Power Plan gives states flexibility. States may choose what goes into their plans. The state plans lay out how they will achieve the needed reductions. It is important to note here that EPA is not proposing emission rate goals or guidelines for sources in Indian country and U.S. territories at this time. However, EPA will be proposing goals, if necessary or appropriate, for areas of Indian country with affected power plants and for U.S. territories with affected power plants in a supplemental proposal. As required by law, EPA's proposal identifies the best ways to reduce power plant pollution at a reasonable cost. The key to reducing carbon pollution from the power sector is to generate and use power more efficiently. Put another way, the objective is to reduce the carbon pollution emitted for each megawatt hour of electricity generated. If a source emits a lot of carbon dioxide but produces relatively little energy, then its carbon intensity is considered high. Each state's goal reflects the fact that carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel-fired power plants are determined both by how efficiently they operate and by how much they operate. EPA is proposing that states develop plans for the power sector to reduce the pollution-to-power ratio. The idea is not to limit the amount of power we produce. This plan is about reducing the overall amount of carbon pollution from power plants while still producing the energy we need. Let's look at how EPA established a goal for each state. As noted earlier, under the Clean Air Act, EPA must determine what is called the best system of emission reduction for reducing carbon pollution from power plants. The best system consists of measures from 4 building blocks: improving operations at power plants, using power from units with low carbon emissions to meet demand, expanding the use of renewables, and end-use energy efficiency. EPA analyzed the practical and affordable strategies that states and utilities are already using to lower carbon pollution from the power sector. Using that information and applying the best system of emission reduction, EPA set a goal for every state. Every state's goal is different because each state has a different mix of emissions, power sources, renewables, and opportunities to improve the efficiency of electricity use in homes and businesses. EPA determined that the measures that make up this best system are already being implemented in some places, can be implemented more broadly across the power system, and can work in combination to improve statewide carbon emission rates. To set these state-specific goals, EPA gathered publicly available data for each state from 2012, which is the most current information available. This included carbon dioxide emissions from each state's current fossil fuel power plants, information about renewables and energy efficiency policies, and data about how power is generated and moved around the electricity system. EPA used emissions and generation information from each state's fossil fuel-fired power plants to calculate its 2012 emission rate. That gave EPA a starting point for each state. From 2012, EPA looked ahead to what could reasonably be accomplished by 2030 across the power sector if states made practical and affordable changes to generate electricity without emitting as much carbon dioxide. EPA entered this energy information and emissions data for each state into a formula. The resulting goal is a pollution-to-power ratio for the future carbon intensity of existing power plants that also reflects opportunities for renewable energy and energy efficiency in a given state. Each state's goal is different, and each state can decide how it will meet its goal using measures that make sense to them. States are not required to use all the measures EPA identified, but rather use the combination of approaches that will work to bring down their carbon intensity rate. The first column includes the 4 building blocks, or categories of reduction measures we discussed earlier. Column 2 shows the specific measures that EPA used to calculate the state goal. The final column provides examples of the kinds of measures states can use to meet their goal. Note that these measures can be quite different from the measures EPA used to set the goal. The differences between columns 2 and 3 illustrate that states have broad flexibility in meeting their goals, and that they may differ from the approach taken to set the goals. Please note that the list in column 3 is not exhaustive. In addition to flexibility in methodologies, states also have timing flexibility in meeting their carbon pollution reduction goals. States will have time to ramp up their programs. They can choose to achieve fewer emissions reductions in the early years and more in the later years. However, the proposal is designed to ensure that progress is being made throughout the time period, rather than waiting to achieve all of the reductions at the end. We anticipate the timing of the reductions will vary, depending on a state's particular situation. Some measures are more easily implemented and may achieve quick reductions, while others may take longer to implement and to realize the reductions. For example, it may take time for a state that does not have significant demand-side energy efficiency programs to ramp those up. Or working through the specifics of creating new or adding to existing multi-state programs may require additional time. State plans must be designed to achieve and maintain affected power plant emissions performance consistent with the final 2030 goal as well as an interim goal. These interim emissions performance goals apply during the years 2020 to 2029 on a 10-year average or cumulative basis as states ramp up programs to meet their final goals. By 2030, EPA expects electricity bills to shrink by roughly 8% as energy efficiency programs ramp up and as consumers use electricity much more efficiently. Today's technologies will help get more work out of every unit of power produced. This means homes and businesses can get the same lighting, cooling, and heating out of less electricity. Let's look at some of the other costs and benefits of the Clean Power Plan. EPA heard from consumers during our stakeholder outreach that there are ways to reduce carbon pollution and keep power affordable for all. This proposed plan ensures an ongoing supply of reliable, affordable power that will be needed for economic growth. It moves us toward a cleaner, more stable environment for future generations, and will help protect children and other vulnerable Americans from the health threats posed by a range of pollutants. In fact, reductions from this proposed Clean Power Plan will lead to public health and climate benefits worth an estimated $55 to $93 billion in 2030. EPA has estimated that 2,700 to 6,600 premature deaths and 140,000 to 150,000 asthma attacks will be prevented in 2030. We estimated the cost at $7.3 billion to $8.8 billion in 2030 from soot and smog reductions alone. For every dollar invested through the Clean Power Plan, American families will see up to $7 in health benefits. As the numbers indicate, the benefits of this proposal outweigh the costs, and we see significant health improvements in 2030. So, how do we proceed? EPA will provide a list of a dozen components that will need to be included in a state's plan. It will include things like a description of the plan approach and geographic scope, and monitoring, reporting, and record-keeping requirements. These plans must also identify measures to meet the state's interim goals and final goal. An interim goal must be met on average over a 10-year period from 2020 through 2029, with a final goal that must be met in 2030 and thereafter. Both the individual and multi-state plans are due to EPA by June 30, 2016. EPA has proposed to allow an extension to submit a complete plan if states demonstrate more time is needed. Individual state plans could be granted a one-year extension to June 30, 2017, and multi-state plans could be granted up to a two-year extension until June 30, 2018. The proposed Clean Power Plan provides flexibility to the states so that they can use and/or expand programs and preserve reliable, affordable power for all Americans. EPA's analysis finds that there will be enough capacity across the U.S. electricity system to meet the anticipated level of demand. Coal and natural gas will continue to play an important role in a diverse U.S. energy mix for years to come, with each providing more than 30% of projected generation in 2030. EPA will also continue to rely on our discussions with a broad variety of stakeholders, including states, the Department of Energy, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, utilities, regional transmission operators, and state public utility regulators to make sure reliability is appropriately considered and addressed. In summary, the Clean Power Plan proposal will reduce carbon pollution from existing power plants, for which there are currently no national limits. It will allow us to maintain an affordable, reliable energy system. The plan will cut hundreds of thousands of tons of harmful particle pollution, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides as a co-benefit. And it will provide important health protections to the most vulnerable, such as children and older Americans. When fully implemented, the Clean Power Plan proposal will lead to health and climate benefits worth an estimated $55 billion to $93 billion in 2030. This proposal builds on the actions states, cities, and businesses across the country are already taking to address the risks of climate change. It provides an array of tools that states can use to formulate approvable plans. It requires reasonable and achievable emission reduction goals, and provides a flexible timeline, up to 15 years from issuance of the guidelines, for all emission reduction measures to be fully implemented in 2030. Information on how to comment on the proposed plan and all of the supporting technical information are available online at www.epa.gov/cleanpowerplan. EPA will hold several public hearings with locations in Denver, Colorado, Atlanta, Georgia, Washington, D.C., and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The public comment period for the Clean Power Plan proposal is open through October 16th. We look forward to hearing your comments. In closing, carbon pollution is a threat to public health, and it needs to be addressed as investments are made in our energy future. A national policy to address carbon pollution from power plants will reduce the uncertainty for investors, owners, and operators. The required reductions in carbon pollution under the proposed Clean Power Plan will benefit the health and welfare of generations to come.